Hey everyone, we'll get started in just a minute here. If you could do me a favor, just give a thumbs up if you can see us and hear us, and that would be great. Maybe share where you're joining from, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. All right, should we get started?
Yes.
All right, cool. Yeah, so thanks for everyone joining. Welcome to Office 365 Office Hours. We are here to help anything that you might need help with regarding Office 365, modern workplace, any topics like that. Feel free to plug them in chat. We do this every first Wednesday of the month, so we try to take an hour or so of our time to set aside every month and provide this for the community. I will say we do record this, so if you come up and ask a question or like if we pull you on stage for clarifying a question or something, feel free to let us know if you would prefer it to not be recorded, and we can do that. As far as agenda goes today, we're going to spend a couple minutes going over some questions that we've recently gotten on some of our YouTube videos that we feel like might be helpful to our audience. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time going over any questions that anyone who is here live has, and we'll go from there. I will shout out too, we are doing this from YouTube as well as a Microsoft Teams meeting. If you're watching from YouTube and would like to come up and ask a question, something other than just that you can enter via chat, feel free to click on the link in the chat and join our Teams meeting. But I think that's all I have, so I think we can cut to Matt and Mike.
Cool. Thanks, Mitch. So as Mitch said, we're going to get started first with a couple of questions that we've helped to answer over the course of the last month. And the first one of those questions has to do with an Excel file that's stored in OneDrive. And it's got a table with some data in it. And the idea is that they want to trigger whenever this table is updated to actually do something using Power Automate Flow. And the challenge they were having is that when somebody updates the table, something else is going on and the Excel file is actually getting touched a couple times and hence triggering the Power Automate Flow a couple times. So the initial response to this is that you might want to consider some alternatives to OneDrive for what you're doing. So in this scenario, if that you have multiple users who are accessing data in the Excel file and are making updates to it, OneDrive might not be the best place for that. You might instead put it in SharePoint somewhere or in a Microsoft team, which behind the scenes is SharePoint, and you can certainly enable a trigger for Power Automate from those locations as well. But then the second thing that we would add is that the trigger that you're using for when an Excel file is updated or when a file is updated simply doesn't support a action within the Excel spreadsheet for when a trigger or when a data row gets updated. So it's just simply not supported. So if that's something that you need and you want to track individual changes to rows of your data, I would probably recommend converting your Excel file to a SharePoint list or something similar. And then you can trigger on when an item is updated or created in that SharePoint list and then do what you need to do. You'll have much more control over the scenario. And then if you still have reporting needs where you want to surface that data in Excel somehow or in some other report tool like Power BI, you can certainly use the SharePoint list as a source for that data or for that report. So that's kind of what we would recommend there. Since there truly isn't a individual Excel row trigger option available at this time. So then the next question we have, you're going to take that one? It's how do I change a username to an email in the login page or the sign-in page for a Poweraps portal?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a second and try to explain a little bit about what this is to make sure everybody understands what's going on. I don't know, Mitch, if you're sharing my screen. But basically, a Powerapps portal is a little bit different than other portal or other apps. It's more like a traditional marketing application or custom web application, but it's still built in Powerapps. And so Powerapps controls everything about it, both the content and also all of the configuration, how it works. And so this question really comes down to the configuration of the portal. So if I go in, and this is my a portal that we have that is a testing portal or a portal. Actually, my portal's missing for some reason. I don't exactly know why. Let me refresh. Should be there. But basically, the question has to do with the authentication for the portal. And so a portal works way different than a standard Powerapp in that a portal is really meant for collaborating with external users, so customers or just the general public, anybody really, and you can choose how you want to authenticate. The default or out-of-the-box solution is what's called local authentication. And so in that model, it's much like, if you're familiar at all with web development, it's much like having my own username and password database and managing the username, passwords, registration, password resets, all of those things together. And so what this person is asking is, when I register, I don't want to, so the default for a Powerapp is to have a username and an email address and then like first name, last name, all of those details. And they're saying, well, I really want the email address to be the username because that's what modern tools do a lot of times, right? Which is possible, and this finally came up so I can explain it. Sure.
Where are you going with that? So the local auth scenario, is that equivalent for those in the dev world who come from a traditional dev background to something like ASP.NET?
Yeah, yep, it's very similar to ASP.NET membership or ASP.NET identity. You know, those types of things is a very similar kind of thing. You've got your own database of username, passwords, and all of that stuff, right?
And you manage it in your application.
You manage it. If you want FBA, you need to manage that. If you want to have extra FMA, I should say, MFA, multi-factor authentication. You have to do that all yourself, right? Like that's all on you as the developer, as someone who's managing this. I don't know what is going on, but it is not loading. So this has all of the identities that are available to you to select. And in this particular case, for the one that I'm going to show you right here, if it'll come up, all of them are disabled with the exception of the Microsoft authentication. So in this app, it's over here, this is like a demo app that we were doing. This portal app basically has this login button, and when I log in, instead of going to what you would usually be like a custom login, it takes you directly to, oh, what Microsoft account you want to access. Now you might notice that this Microsoft account that's being shown is a personal Microsoft account. This doesn't have my Bulb Digital corporate Microsoft account, right? These are all individual Microsoft accounts. That is because if it would come up here, that's the option that I selected here. I could have chosen a Google account. I could have chosen a Facebook account. I could have chosen Twitter. I could have chose Azure or AD. There's lots of different things you can choose from here that are not the local authentication. Our recommendation is to not use local authentication. Microsoft's recommendation is to not use local authentication. The reason is you now have taken ownership of that username, that password, all of the security around that, all of the controls around that, right? Instead, what we recommend is using one of those other options. Microsoft highly recommends Azure B2C. And so what that is really allowing you to create customers in your Azure Active Directory and allow you to manage them directly. So it's a combination between using an external provider and your own provider. But that's what they recommend. Really, it's up to you about what your business need is and who you're engaging with and how you want to engage. But definitely, we would not recommend just using the local authentication. To answer the question more specifically, though, it's just a register page. It's a HTML page, an ASPX page. There are ways within the portal maintenance system to go in and use JavaScript to kind of fake out the username and make it the email address. And so what you would do is probably hide the email address, leave the username, and then when you type in the username, when you're done, automatically put the email address in or the username in the email address, or vice versa. Only show the email address and then put it in the username. But something like that is what you can do. But again, that's pretty high-level technical development, and we wouldn't recommend it for security reasons. And I'm sorry, I wish I could show you this, but for some reason, I don't know whether or not it's our internet or I don't know what's going on, but it's not showing what I want it to show. If it does, maybe we'll show it a little later, but let's see, I'll try one more time.
I just want to mention one other thing, Matt, that I don't want to say you overlooked it, but you failed to mention it, and that is the user experience that someone has when they're able to log in with their own email address versus having to have another username and password.
Yeah, so that's
to get into your.
Yeah, so it's
portal,
it's another case of why you would use a third party. So what Mike's talking about is, I don't want to have to remember another username and password, right? We've all experienced it. You go to a site, and there's a lot of times there'll be an option: create an account, put in a username and password, or authenticate with Google, authenticate with Facebook. This also provides that, so I didn't mention this, but it also provides that option. You could actually say, we support Facebook and Microsoft account and Twitter, and then you as the end user can choose which one it is, because you don't really care. You're just, all you care about is that they have been authorized by whatever identity authorized identity source that you trust. So if you trust all of them, there's nothing wrong with allowing the user to choose what they want.
Yep. Yeah, there's nothing worse than, oh, I got to have
Another thing and another password and another security questions and more. Yeah. Yep.
That's just one way we can make the world a better place, is less passwords.
It's still not loading up, so I wish I could show you guys this, but it's not showing up, and I don't know why. So.
Okay. Well, we do have a question.
We do? Okay.
It's from Brian. He's asking, when he's using Powerapps portal for external client access, should his database be stored as, and the options are imported from SQL database or maintained in Microsoft Dataverse, extended with tables, views, forms, etc.
Yeah, so the easiest thing, the cheapest thing is to use Dataverse because you're getting that kind of out of the box. So Dataverse, and I'm saying the cheapest and easiest, everything's nuanced. So if you're going to tell me that you have 2 terabytes worth of data, you're going to have to pay for that storage, right? You only get a certain amount of storage with a Dataverse default instance, and with a certain, you get data capacity, you go over it, you have to pay money. It's not super simple, but my default reaction is you should be putting it in the Dataverse. And the reason I'm saying that is that Dataverse has model-driven app that allow you to manage the data in the Dataverse that is being used by the portal. But then in addition, all of the functionality within the portal, which I don't know, again, I don't know if I can show you because this is acting strange for some reason. But the portal management tool works off all those tables directly. So you can create a new page that lists out content. I think maybe this one has, actually this may have, I don't remember what this does. I think we did.
That one's just for show.
Yeah, but I think we did the login. It was just for show for sure. But I feel like I did a login, and then I think if you selected.
There's some things after login.
This. So this has a table in the back end in Dataverse, and I think it shows some stuff from that. I just can't remember. Oh no, it was the apply. That's what the deal was.
Part of your response, we're basically saying if you're using Dataverse, you've kind of got some functionality built into the platform already to help you manage your data. Whereas if you use SQL database or a SQL backend, you get to build an app yourself.
More than just that, it's I don't even know that you really can, the way that I would do it would probably be to sync the data from SQL into the Dataverse, and then I don't know that there's a good way around it otherwise. But in this particular case, for example, this form, this is based on a custom table. So if I go into the Dataverse and I go to tables, and I'm gonna have to remember what the entity was, but assuming it opens up. But there's an entity in here for submitting an application or application, which has these fields, and you design the form in the Powerapps editor. And here, let me see if I can get it. Coex application, yeah, so it's here. So this is the entity, and then in this entity, there's a form, And I think
Cameo
the
from
main
Ashley
form.
Jolman, everyone.
yeah, say hi to Ashley for us. So if you open this up now, you're going to see basically here's my form, and if I were to make a change to this form and I publish it, this is automatically going to get updated because this page is set to consume the form on this entity, which I think there's just something weird going on with this tenant. But so that's our recommendation. Our recommendation would be used the dataverse. I think there was another question.
Yeah, so this next question is a follow-up, and it's another good one. Can you distinguish between Powerapp's portals, standalone, and Poweraps for teams in terms of licensing, cost, and migration of work, or
yeah.
even like data back and forth? So, like,
So that's a good question. Great question.
can you have your teams
Yeah.
dataverse
So-
connected to the same as your Poweraps portal,
Uh,
or do you have to do work to sync
lots of good questions. So Teams is not, the Teams is a carve out of Powerapps in particular. Basically where they've said, when you create a team and you want to start doing stuff in Powerapps, we're going to create an environment for you. And we're going to allow you to treat that environment like it's a free environment. So you can mess with the dataverse, you can mess with all these things. There's some restrictions on how you can get to the data and integrations and other things, but generally speaking, it's like a free way to get dataverse without having to pay for premium license of Powerapps, premium license of Power Automate, all of that good stuff. I don't think you can put a portal in a Teams environment. I've never tried, but I can't imagine you can. Powerapps portals, when I talk about that, it's really the difference between Powerapps portals, model-driven apps, and Canvas-driven apps. And so Canvas apps is super customizable. It's a blank canvas, right? See the play on words there? You can do whatever you want, right? You can put whatever things you want wherever you want. Model-driven apps are based on the model, as exactly what they're saying, right? So you build tables in Dataverse, you configure the forms in Dataverse, and then you just consume them as part of the app, and you just create navigation elements between all these things. But the model is what's driving it. Portals is like model-driven because it requires Dataverse and uses the Dataverse data, but it allows that external access in a completely different perspective, right? So model-driven is for my employees or internal staff. The portal is for external people to communicate or to deal with that data. A Teams environment, I would have to go look, but I can't imagine that you can put a portal on it.
Does the dataverse, so let's talk about it in terms of environments. Does the dataverse associated with a Teams app or Teams?
Yeah, Teams.
Is that the default environment, or is that a
No, it's a separate. Every time you do it, you get a brand new environment. So if I create 50 teams in my environment and I have Powerapps for each one of them, I'm going to get an environment named after each team.
For each team.
And that's the environments, or
So
what we're
then-
talking about environments like up here. There'll be different environments. Each environment, you can think about an environment as like a fancy database server kind of situation. So it's a container for the database, the apps, the flows,
The users.
like users, like all of these things are contained within an environment.
So by that same question, if we said, I have this team, we've created a dataverse for that team, which means it goes into an environment for that team. Could I not, if I was paying for the licensing, could I not then go into that environment and create a Powerapps portal?
Yeah, so that's, I don't know.
That's
I
the
I
question.
have to imagine that they wouldn't allow it. If it's allowed today, it may not be on purpose, is I guess what I would say. Because the challenge is, what they're trying to do with the Teams thing is they recognize, so this is my perspective, Microsoft, if you're listening, I don't know anything. But what I believe they did is they figured out, well, people aren't using Powerapps. Why aren't they using it? Well, because it's expensive. And if I have to buy one for all my people on my team that are working with stuff, it sucks. Well, cool. If you're just doing it within a team, I want to drive adoption for teams too. So as long as you're working within your team, I'll let you be free.
But for the licensing for a Powerapps portal, like I'm just
It's
trying
different.
to remember the last time I set that up, right?
But it's the opposite of it. The portal licensing is, you're right, per user, external user. But you're supposed
Or
to
per
pay.
usage.
But you're supposed to pay for the internal users that are working with the data on the other side. In this case, you wouldn't pay for it
Because they're in teams.
because they're in teams.
So I think that would be a great scenario to test
Try
out
out
and
for
find
sure,
out
for sure, 100%.
how that actually
100%.
happens.
I just don't know the answer because I've never tried it. But
Sure.
conceivably it could work, but I don't know if it's intended. Like I don't know.
If it does work now and it wasn't intended,
Who knows
do
what'll
it,
happen with
set
it?
it up because
Yeah,
then you'll
because
be
they won't take it
grandfathered
back.
in when they catch
yeah,
you.
exactly. Welcome to Microsoft licensing. So you asked about licensing types, costs, migration work into and out of Teams. So Teams is an environment. It is a special environment. You can't do everything in it. It has limitations. It has some things that are special about it. Migration from a team to a non-team environment, you can do it. I think you can even just license the Teams environment and just start using it with more full featured functionality. But if you want to move it, solutions are pretty easy. You export, import the solutions. The data is a little bit more complicated, but there are tools to migrate the data or transfer the data between one and the other, as long as they're matching. The biggest problem is a lot of the custom table names will be prefixed with stuff that is unique to that environment, which can cause problems, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that and migrate the stuff. Usually, most of the time, if you're actually building a custom app, we're recommending to start out with a custom environment because the environment doesn't cost you anything, truly. The environment itself doesn't cost you anything, really, as long as you're not over your storage limitations, which most people have at least some storage that's available to them. So generally speaking, our thing is just do it in the environment. With that said, though, if you're going to end up having to pay for Powerapps licenses for every user that's using it, that's the reason why it's like, oh, maybe I do want to do it in Teams so I don't have to pay for those Powerapps licenses for everybody.
Yep. And in terms of environments and dedicated to an app, we also recommend a dev environment.
Yeah, dev,
a test
test, prod,
environment, and then a production
which isn't easy to
environment.
do. Which isn't easy to do in Teams because Teams doesn't
Right.
support that same thing, right? Like
Right.
that's part of the challenges related to doing it within Teams. But Teams is the way to do it for cheap, right?
Right.
If you have a 5-person company and you don't want to pay for 5 Powerapps licenses, I would 100% look at using the Teams environment for it because it's free.
Right. Yep.
I think Brian's writing to us again. Avoid Teams, cover cost of external. Yeah, cover cost of external users. So the external users, honestly, it's expensive. Although I think
so
at
the way-
Ignite they dropped the price.
The pricing for
in half.
Powerapp's portals is truly, it starts out as more of a usage-based model, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's basically number of logins.
Well, it depends on whether or not it's authenticated or unauthenticated. So
Assume
there's-
authenticated per
Yep,
his question.
authenticated users, it's page views per month, or
Yep.
I shouldn't say that. Logged in users per month.
Logged in
so
users per month.
if I log in for that for one time, that is one session that lasts 24 hours, right? After that 24 hours, if I log in again, that same user, I use another session. I think the default one is you pay a certain amount a month and you get 200 authenticated sessions a month, and then you can buy more for that. But basically, the way it works for authenticated connections is you're getting a certain amount of sessions per month that people will be able to use. So if your usage is pretty sparse, it's not that big of a deal. You're going to be good with just the baseline. If you have a lot of users using it all the time, logging in all the time, the cost is just going to go up. And I was looking at it, know they updated the pricing.
Well, 100 login sessions per month is $200.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
that's right on their website. And then the other option is page view capacity, which is $100 per month for 100,000 page views.
So that's for unauthenticated content.
Right. Yep.
So that the concept there is
Public website.
I just have a marketing website, and I've got a bunch of product catalog data as an example. People go view it. That pricing is just for page views of that. Brian, hopefully we answered the question. If not, you're more than welcome to let us know, and you can come on and ask the question live if you want. But think we probably covered most everything you needed. I know we've got at least a few more people on. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. Okay. Well, I think we'll give it a few more minutes, and Mike and I'll hang out for a minute, and if there's any more questions, we'll jump back into it. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. This is a good one.
Yeah, so we just got a question from YouTube, basically asking about talking about file shares. So companies who are going from on-premise file shares and they want to start taking that content and put it into SharePoint libraries, and how do you do it? What do you recommend? And they have a lot of permissions on subfolders. And then the other comment they just made was metadata and tags aren't exactly made for permissions. Permissions for a lot of subfolders get messy and hard to manage. Yep.
So I think the first thing here that we would that I would say would be the way forward, that as Microsoft has defined it with SharePoint and content in SharePoint, is to define your permissions or create your security boundaries with a site collection. So they've adopted a much more flat structure. So instead of having a site collection with a bunch of subsites in a hierarchical way, their recommendation is flat. So if you have a specific purpose that has security wrapped around it, create a site collection for that, or create a Microsoft team for that. And then for your other security purpose, create another team for that. And the reason that they're recommending that is kind of indicated in your question, right? The complexity of permissions on those hierarchical folders can become challenging, especially if you have to change something in the middle or the top of the hierarchy, and it becomes unwieldy and unmanageable. So they're recommending don't do that anymore. Figure out clearer boundaries and set those things up in individual containers that don't depend on one another.
So the other thing that I would say is people do this a lot. They look at it and they say, hey, I got all this storage space in SharePoint, and I got all these on-premise servers that have storage on it, and I'm paying for it. I want to stop paying for it.
Yep.
And so their premise for moving it is not really genuine, right? They're not like, I love SharePoint and I love the features of SharePoint and I want to move the data into SharePoint. It's more of, save me some money. And so their conversation is all about how to do exactly what they could do before, just in SharePoint. And that is a bad place to start from, would be the first thing I would say. Mm-hmm. Even if the money is the initial impetus, or even if it's not money, if it's just somebody told you it's a good idea and I want the file syncing capability, right? Like, so maybe there's other people, it's not always money, just to be clear, but money is a big one. But if, let's say it's because they think, oh, I want to have my documents like what I have on my Google Drive, and I want to be able to sync all the stuff down, and I want to have it synced to my machine and manage it all that way, right? And I want to be able to access it from anywhere. I don't want to have to just be on the network, right? Those are all fine as a starting point, but then you need to quickly recognize that SharePoint, so they need to recognize first that file shares in a file system are not great for a lot of reasons. And SharePoint and these other technologies are not going to solve those problems that they had before, right? And in some ways it'll be worse because it's not meant to do, to manage all of that in this complexity. So one of the first things I like to do is have a conversation about, do an audit of their content and say, why is the permissions this way, right? Oh, because my little group has stuff that we're working on that I don't want other people to see before it's really ready. Is that really a reason that you need to lock everyone out of it? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it's super important because it's financial information. That's probably a good reason. If it's just because I don't want people to be able to see it, I don't know that that is a good reason to have all of this extra overhead and extra management, right? Now, where people will push back and say is, well, I can't trust these people to not edit my stuff. Now we're back to what Mike said. They probably shouldn't be in the same library as you. You should not be in the same library. You shouldn't be in the same site. You shouldn't be in the same, that should be separate because you have separate goals, separate needs, separate everything, right? But if you look at a boundary and say, I'm in the marketing team and I've got a marketing share. And if you are locking down stuff in the marketing share at the level that you're having a problem managing the security, something is probably wrong, right? Because you should be able to trust everybody in the marketing team to know what they're doing and know what everybody's like, what the plan is for a team and work on it effectively. That's the point of having online collaboration on these documents and not sending it through email and working in a collaborative way on these documents, right? You're supposed to trust people to not just delete content, and you're supposed to trust the tools that have, a recycle bin and version history and all these other things, right? And so one of the first things I would talk about is just simplifying, right? Making it, do your best to make it smaller and simpler. And then beyond that, what Mike said, which is cool, let's break this up. Like, we should not have one mammoth S drive with all the content from everywhere, right? We should really have that content be siloed into, like Mike said, a team. These are people who work together. That's where that content should be. Oh, here's a site because they communicate with lots of people. This is what that should be, right? And then using the roles, so member, owner, visitor, or a custom one if you need to manage that at a high level rather than at a folder and file level. Because when you get into folder and file management, it doesn't matter whether or not you're in a file share or not. It's a pain. It's a lot of work, and it's a difficult thing to manage. The last thing I'll say on this topic is related to your last comment, which was related to metadata and tags. You're right, they're not made for permissions, but it goes to the first thing I said, which is that people think about moving it, and they don't think about the fact that it's a different technology. People should be thinking about how to use metadata and tags in their workflow going forward, right? So as you're moving, yes, That's not a requirement. You don't have to do that. It's not, doesn't help you with permissions, but it can if you're currently doing permissions because these people could see it, but I don't want them to see it all the time. Use metadata, use views, that's all new. You couldn't do that before in the old file share, but you can now, right? Tag these things to who should be looking at them, create views that those people can use to see just the stuff they need, and now they won't be traversing through a myriad of folder structure to get to the files they need. They'll just have the files that they need, right? You can use audiencing, you can use tags, you can use views, there's so many things that you can do to make an experience much better for the users. On the flip side, last thing I'll say, that only works through the UI, right? If they're going like what I said, that, hey, I want to just use this so I can use it like my Google Drive and sync the content down to my folders and files, all that tagging, all of those other things aren't very useful. So I know it's complicated, and it depends a little bit about how you're using stuff, but those would be the things I would say.
So just a couple things. One thing I'll finish with, and then one thing I want to reiterate. Do your content audit. Figure out the why on all of your content.
Yeah.
Once you know where it needs to go, set up the new homes for it, and then plan on moving it. And then the last thing that I would note is there are tools out there that will help you scan your file
Figure it out, yeah.
And
ShareGate is one of them.
ShareGate is one that we like to use. And a reason to use those tools is it will do things like identify files that have file names that SharePoint won't support, or identify files that are going to be too large for you to upload to SharePoint.
Unused.
Or stuff that hasn't been touched in forever, right?
Yep.
So those tools can be helpful in that content audit process as well.
Cool. So we had somebody ask another question. Trying to build an app, is there a way to branch the choice column in a SharePoint list? It's a great question. So I'm going to imagine that you mean to create a hierarchical list options. So what I think you mean by that, and if you want to respond, you can. Like, I choose this, and it means that another choice column only shows 4 of the 5 things. Is that what you meant?
I think that sounds right to me.
I think it's right. We'll see.
I'm also assuming she's building a Powerapp.
Yeah, so that was going to be my other question is, when you say app, do you really mean that you're building a Powerapp, or you're just trying to do this in SharePoint? And the reason I'm asking that is, in Powerapps, you can do what you're trying to do. You'd have to write code to do it, right? So you'd have to configure the formulas within Powerapps, but you can basically say, hey, check what the value is of this field, and then limit my other list to just these options would be a great way to go about doing it. But remember that doesn't stop someone from going into the SharePoint list and modifying the content and editing it there and seeing more than what you might want.
They could edit in grid view, for example.
Yep, or you can disable, you can disable grid view, you can disable some other things, but ultimately, this is the biggest thing that people forget about. When people start developing and they develop with SharePoint and they think SharePoint is their thing, what they don't realize is that the permissions for SharePoint on items are view and edit. That's the entire item. If you give someone edit rights to that entire item, if they want to bring up PowerShell and go modify it however they have rights to do that. They have permission to do that, right?
So no column level permissions.
There's no column level permissions. There's no permissions to say, this column nobody can edit. This column, if you have edit, they have edit, right? That's just the way it is. Now you can mask it. You can use all the apps to control it, which are usually more than good enough. And obviously, there's all sorts of auditing tools that'll tell you with version history. Even if they did make it, you'd know that they made a change that they shouldn't have made. So it's not like don't use SharePoint, but just remember that that's the case, right? And you're relying on the users using your app to interface with the app.
Yep.
Amy, does that help you with it, or did you want to see something more?
Just note that the delay with YouTube chat is quite a bit longer than Teams, so it might be a little bit.
That's okay.
Get responses.
Yep. We'll wait for her to respond. In the meantime, I'm going to take a glass, take a drink.
I have had to implement a filter on a Powerapps form for SharePoint.
Yeah, same with me.
Just that same way, right?
So the only thing I would say about that is that sometimes what I do is I don't use a choice column anymore. I'll just put a text field in there. and in the Powerapp create the drop downs of options that I want, and then I don't even have to manage it in SharePoint. It's just a free text field.
Yeah, and in the one that I did, I think I simply, like for the items property, I simply
Did a filter on it.
applied a filter to that and got exactly what I wanted, right, with an if statement.
Yep.
Good questions today.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I had a form, but it's becoming massive. I was going to transform it into a list, then build an application from there. So I should just start from a blank canvas. Okay, yeah. So you don't have to. Again, when you said I had a form, I presume you mean well, you said convert it into a list. So I don't exactly know what you, maybe
Like a
you meant
Microsoft form?
like a Microsoft form, maybe is what she meant.
Could be.
So that makes sense. So it would be a natural progression to go from a Microsoft form into a SharePoint list. That would be just fine, a progression. There's a couple different ways to go about that. You don't have to start with a blank canvas app. You can create the list in SharePoint, and then you can edit the list form or the edit form, display form, using Powerapps, and you can implement the logic that we were talking about. Just again, remember that doesn't mean, like, in order for that to be really effective and locked down, you need to disable inline editing and the grid view.
Yep.
Grid view.
Edit in grid view.
Edit and grid view functionality, which are in the properties of the list. So if you disable those, and then whatever you have in the app, that'll be pretty locked down.
Doesn't inline editing, if you apply the Powerapps customized list form, doesn't inline editing get turned off automatically?
Not that I saw. I always had to turn it off. Could be now.
Like for me, the default behavior was after I had implemented that form, anytime you clicked on the item, I only got my form.
Yeah, so when you click on it, but then, so if I open the info panel, like if I choose to open the info panel, and then I click in it, click in a field, it would still do it. That's what I experienced. But they're changing this stuff all the time. It's possible that could have changed.
There, yep.
But so those are the two things that I would do. Is like if I were you, your next step would be put it into make a list that has all your columns, and then edit the form and modify the form to be what you want. Now, the next step from that, to be clear, would be to create a blank canvas app. So use the SharePoint site, create a dedicated Canvas app. Don't even tell anybody about the list. Don't even tell them about the SharePoint site. Just say, hey, here's my Canvas app. Go to the Canvas app, and that's where everything is. You're going to get the best experience from, like, control over the experience. But you have to, like you said, you have to start from scratch, quote unquote. The next step, just to finish it all the way, the next step after that is similar to what somebody else was asking about related to using teams and using dataverse. So, if the people who are using this content are only people within a small team, you could create a team, which creates an environment, and then you can use dataverse, which is more like SQL, so it has less of the problems related to permissions and all of these other things. And it basically would allow you to do, you would still be doing either a blank canvas or using a model-driven app to go design the application that you're going to do. But that would be kind of the next step in an iteration of an application's life, if you will.
Yeah, I recommend starting with the SharePoint list form.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a super easy place to start.
Yep.
It will put most of the fields on the form for you automatically. Yep. It's very easy to add and remove them and change the formatting and the number of columns and that kind of stuff. Very, very easy way to start. It's 10x better than InfoPath.
Correct. And it's better than MS Forms, quite frankly.
Yep.
I'm going to put a link to our video on customizing forms.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So hopefully that was helpful. Amy, again, if you have any more questions, feel free. We're going to be here if anybody has any more questions.
Cool. So, Matt, we have another question that came from YouTube.
Yep.
And they're asking if we're planning on doing any videos on Dataverse. So he's coming from a non-database background and really wants to understand the basics.
Yeah. So we have content that is in our content board for a long time. I don't know exactly if there's any Dataverse ones. I know, Mike, that would be in your content board. I don't know if there's any specific ones, but we can definitely add one if there's interested.
Yeah, nothing specific. I think it would be a good one to add. I think, intro to Dataverse, right, would be kind of a good one to go after.
Yeah, I think we were
certainly
focused
can
on
add it.
stuff that wouldn't require a license, and Dataverse requires a license, and so then we kind of
It gets you
we
into
put it lower on our list,
Yep,
if you will.
Yep, for sure. We're trying to target people who are getting started, and the reality is, 99% of everyone who has Office 365 gets the free pieces of it, and so that's where a lot of the focus is helping with those pieces. But certainly, I think that is a good ask and something we can put in our backlog.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll add that we're investigating some options as far as like laying out base level knowledge sharing for topics like that. If you have any sort of desire of like an intro to Powerapps, intro to Dataverse, anything like that, that's like, hey, it would be really great to learn these concepts from the ground up. We'd love to know, because that's another area of focus that we're working on. So appreciate the recommendation.
Yeah, so there was a comment about one of us needs to probably go from double digits to single coffee before doing videos. I'm pretty sure they're talking about me. Probably. That's been said before. And I don't drink coffee or consume caffeine. So maybe the real solution is I need more coffee. That's possible. Yes, we have another question.
In the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, so
Trying to create a Powerapp to view a PDF from SharePoint.
Oh, yeah.
Can I add a feature to rename the file name on the same Powerapp form?
Yeah, you for sure can. So like you're thinking like click a button and rename it. You 100% can do that. Basically, you just have to figure out the patch command because basically you're going to be patching that item.
Two possibilities here. One is it could be in a document library.
Yep.
Right, and assuming it is, the patch command would be an appropriate way to do it.
Yep.
The other possibility is that it's an attachment to a list item.
Well, an attachment to a list item is a little more difficult,
So
tricky.
in the case of the attachment to
You
the
can
list
still
item,
do it.
you need to like pull it down, put it in OneDrive somewhere probably,
Yeah,
rename it,
and then put
and
it
then
back up.
reattach it.
Yeah. There might be oh, he said attachment. Look at that. And tricky.
Hey.
Mike's gets the gold star, so he sorted out.
So in the case of the attachment, I think you'll have to like pull it from the list item, put it in OneDrive or maybe in SharePoint in like a temporary location.
So it used to be you could enumerate those attachments and do something with them. So yes, what you just said is true. You could download it, rename it in OneDrive, and then try to re-upload it again, get the content and re-upload it. You may also be able to use the REST API to do something directly to it.
So I know,
But that would be a premium, to be clear, just to be really clear, that probably would be a premium connector.
So recent experience in copying an item from one list to another list that
Yep.
they have attachments.
Yeah.
In the Power Automate flow that I created, there's a simple loop. So we copy all of the
Yeah,
metadata,
we went through all the
right?
content.
And then we loop through the attachments.
Yeah, the
and for each
content.
attachment, we basically pull the data into the flow,
Yeah.
like the raw file data.
Yeah, the
And
contents.
then write it to the new
Yep.
as a new attachment to the
Which
new
I think you
file.
could. I
So-
think you probably could do the same thing. With a Powerapp, it's a little bit more tricky, I think, in regards to storing off the content. But you should be able to do something similar. So Javier, the answer is yes. You should be able to do it. The question would be technically how to make it happen. Copying it to OneDrive is one thing, but I think Mike is right, and it's what I was thinking. I know in Power Automate it will work. But basically, if you can get those attachments and get the file content stored into a variable in Powerapps, you could then just say, upload a new attachment, and then delete the old attachment.
Right.
But that's probably your best
Yep.
bet.
Yep. And if that proves to be difficult, you can always use Power Automate as the intermediary.
Yeah, you
and
could call a
fire-
Power Automate
fire the
from
flow from Powerapps.
Powerapps. Which to be I'm gonna be really clear, that may be a better solution overall because when you do that, you can let that be unattended and you can just kick it off and it just doesn't tie up the Power Automate or Power App. If you do it all in the Power App, when you click the button, that's the thing it's going to be doing until it's done. So if it's a big PDF or something else, it could take a bunch of time.
Yep.
If you kick off the Power Automate, that may be your ultimately your best solution is just kick off a Power Automate and set it and forget it, right? Like just go.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. I think we've reached the end of our time.
I think we have too. It was really good. Thanks for all the questions, everybody.
Until next time.